Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The bosses of some of Britain's biggest companies, including Tesco and BT, will hold talks with Theresa May later to discuss Brexit and investment in the UK. With me is Edwin Morgan, Director of Policy at the Institute of Directors. We haven't got you just before you go into number 10, but your boss will be going, will they not?
Exactly, yeah.
Now, it was interesting because there was a round table of European, mainly multinationals, and they put out quite a punchy statement last week about, uncertainty means lower investment, or it was something like that. Are we at the point where some of these businesses that will be turning up at Downing Street are sort of a little bit fed up with lack of clarity on customs and on exactly where Brexit is going to land?
I mean, I think it's a general opinion across the business community of frustration, not knowing enough, finding it very hard to plan for any kind of eventual outcome because we just don't know what it's going to look like. We are nearly 2 years down the road now. We don't know fairly basic things like the government's preferred option on customs, that kind of thing. So we do really need to get moving on those things. We'll obviously be looking today to hear more about that.
We're just seeing pictures of supermarkets here, and we've heard about some of these doomsday scenarios. But from your mind, from your members, is there any serious threat to some of the just logistics of the way in which our economy works? Do you seriously think that is even an outlying possibility that isn't being fully dealt with right now?
I mean, I think obviously there's been a lot of talk over the weekend about Armageddon scenarios. I mean, who knows? This is a lot of speculation, a lot of bluster.
Yeah.
There are real things that we need to discuss about customs, for example. It's one of the biggest things. The Port of Dover, the people who run it have said if we don't get a satisfactory arrangement, then there could be massive tailbacks, there could be big problems with customs clearance, all that kind of stuff.
2 years ago. I mean, are you seriously telling me that we're not... I mean, it's not your fault. I'm being quite accusatory towards you, Edwin. Apologies. But are you seriously telling me that those same concerns from the Port of Dover are pretty much where they were a year ago, 2 years ago?
I think, honestly, if you talk to most businesses, and most of our members are smaller and medium-sized businesses, so they have less of the direct access, maybe, that a large company like Tesco might have, they really have very little idea of what the final shape of Brexit is going to look like. And partially that's because the negotiations haven't really started on the future partnership. But we don't know, for example, what's going to be agreed about Northern Ireland, what the backstop will be, whether there'll be a separate backstop for Northern Ireland or the whole of the UK. All of these fairly basic questions that we need answers to pretty quickly.
No, you're not being negative about Brexit itself. No. People will say, well, hang on, we've heard this before. All of these acronym-named organisations were very negative. Ahead of the referendum, you're just continuing the same thing. This is Project Fear. Do you get why people say that, or do you think actually there are serious concerns now that need to be addressed? I mean,
I can understand why people say that, but I mean, so the Institute of Directors, we never campaigned during the referendum. We have never in any way tried to go against the vote. We've at every stage just tried to put forward practical, pragmatic steps that the government could take to give businesses more information. Now, on customs, there are alternative options, but frankly, we need to know one of them.
What does the PM need to say to your members today?
Today, she needs to say, this is the path. I mean, she's not going to tell us, let's be realistic, but ideally she would say, this is what we're going to pursue on customs. This is what's going to happen with the Northern Irish border. And these are separately, our continuing inward investment plans. I mean, if she actually picked up some of what the Home Secretary was saying over the weekend about immigration, for example, it's going to be a huge bit of the future inward investment draw for the UK if we have a more sensible visa system, for example. All of those kinds of things are the things we're looking to hear.
If we did have no deal, which is still some ministers, some Conservative MPs think that this is still a great idea, what would your response to the idea of no deal? And this is just in March. This is a few months away now.
I mean, no deal, WTO really is not what businesses want. We've spoken to thousands of our members, we've done countless surveys, and that really is not the route they want to go down. It may not be Armageddon, but I mean, why would we even be trying to go in that direction?
Do you know about? I mean, I did a story a few weeks ago about this idea that there were gagging clauses and non-disclosure agreements being signed. Do you know much? You couldn't tell me if you would, but do you know much about those?
No, I mean, we would if we thought it was practical. have some kinds of those conversations off the record with government. If that worked, if that helped us help our members, but I can honestly say we have not signed anything like that.
Edwin Morgan from the Institute of Directors, thank you very much ahead of the important meeting at Downing Street.
Now, the bosses of some of Britain's biggest companies are holding talks today with the Prime Minister to discuss the status of Brexit negotiations. The meeting comes after a warning from European business chiefs that time is running out to secure trade agreements after the UK leaves the EU. Does the government need to provide more clarity to everyone, regardless of the way you voted, over Brexit? We're joined now by The Guardian journalist Dawn Foster and Deputy Editor of Brexit Central, David Scullion. Thanks both for joining us. David, can I start with you? We will, by the way, get to impending Armageddon in just a few minutes. David, to you first. Generally, more clarity needed, or are we fine as we are?
I think it's a little bit disingenuous for big companies to say that they need more clarity on things like customs. Theresa May outlined in her Lancaster House speech at the beginning of last year that we would be leaving the customs union, so they should have been putting in things in place. However, I think they do have a point on the specific customs arrangement that's needed, so Max Fax versus this new customs partnership. I think Theresa May really needs to get on with making a decision on that, and a decision that takes into account the referendum result of being able to strike free trade deals.
Dawn, I guess, when does that decision need to be made? Because we heard from the Prime Minister's spokesman an hour or so ago saying that this June EU summit is actually just a staging post for October. So is that kicking the can a little bit further down the road?
I think, yes, absolutely. I mean, I agree entirely with what he just said. But also, ever since this happened, over and over again, people have been asking for clarity from Theresa May. Businesses need a bit of time in order to get their affairs in order. They need to know if it's going to be Max Pack or if it will be a customs union. They need to understand what each of those means. And at the moment, nobody knows. Nobody fully understands what will happen. We don't know if we'll fall off a cliff edge or if there will be a buffer period. We haven't had any clarity from Theresa May. She just, as you said, keeps kicking the can down the road, and nobody knows what's going to happen at this point. Least of all the voters.
Like David said, if the government have been doing some no-deal role-playing and preparing themselves, should businesses not have been doing that as well?
I think a lot of them have. Quite a few businesses have talked about moving to Dublin or moving to Germany, and I think at the moment businesses don't really know what's going on. I mean, if you look at Belfast, for instance, Boeing nearly went under, and the only reason it stayed afloat was not because Theresa May stepped in and reassured business, but because Europe did, and because Canada did. And so I think that actually Theresa May could be a lot more proactive, as Europe have been, and she needs to give clarity, and she needs to be more proactive about going to business rather than just expecting them to come to her.
David, what do you think about the words today about this June summit not being maybe quite as important as we thought it was going to be?
Oh, very, very frustrating. Theresa May needs to get on with making these kind of decisions. But, the fundamentals of Brexit are looking good. We have that £40 billion, which we haven't legally agreed to give to the EU yet. We're a top-tier economy. We're a top-tier finance city in the City of London. So if we have the political will to drive this forward, we can make a success of Brexit, even though we've only got about 9 months left. So, the fundamentals are there, but we need some more political will to drive this forward.
Dawn, the fundamentals are there. Maybe a change of personnel.
I think the fundamentals at the moment are so vague. Nobody knows what's happening. We are stepping into the unknown. We are the first country to leave the European Union, and at the moment we just literally don't know what's going to happen. And voters who voted for Brexit are also unclear. They know they want to leave, but at the moment it's completely unclear how that's going to happen. There hasn't been any proper movement on the Irish border question. There hasn't been any proper movement on whether or not we'll be in the customs union, single market. If exactly what will happen and exactly what the timescale is. It feels as if every single time there is a deadline, Theresa May just breezes past it or comes up with an excuse, and this June deadline, not being as important, feels like yet another of those instances. So I think a lot of people will, get to October and expect exactly the same thing. She's put deadlines in place and never really followed through.
David, just picking up on the Northern Ireland border issue, regardless of whether you voted leave or remain, I mean, last week, the idea of this 10-mile wide buffer zone, it's becoming a bit of a joke, isn't it, how many different options we have and the fact that we haven't pinned down exactly what we're going to do here.
Yes, I have to agree, but I think some of the blame needs to come, go for the Irish government and for the EU, who, the Irish government actually blocked plans to be looking into this. Also, Downing Street and the Treasury also blocked plans looking into this max fax solution on the Irish border to look at things like trusted trader schemes and, registrations that would happen outside of the border area. So some blame does need to be laid at Downing Street and at the EU side. They need to just get on with it. They need to come together, make a solution, and just get on with it. These things are possible. There are borders throughout the world that don't require massive fences and barbed wire. And, this is
on that, Dawn, it's just a matter of getting on with it, coming to an agreement with the EU.
I think it may be, but I think at the moment there are so many roadblocks in place and so many issues, like the Northern Irish border, that people won't look at, that it will be impossible to make anybody happy, let alone everybody at this point.
Want to ask you both about another story that we saw over the weekend, the Armageddon. David, I suppose, depending on how you voted, you read that article in two different ways. You either panic or you laugh and you think, scaremongering, they've really gone for it this time. What did you think, David?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this all before, haven't we? The vote to leave was going to be economic Armageddon, and we've seen it again. And, the idea that we'd have, the food would run out of supermarket shelves is just laughable. I mean, 2/3 of our food imports come from outside the EU, and a further 15% are exported to the EU. So we're looking at about 80% of food that we'd be totally fine with. We only have to increase our imports of food by about 20% in the absolute worst case scenario, which, almost certainly is not going to happen.
Yeah, Dom, what did you make of it?
I think there is some hyperbole, but there are some good points in there. I think we need to look at the cost of medicine. We need to work out whether or not we will have to bear the brunt of any medicine rises, or if it will just strain the NHS. I think food is still an issue. There's a lot of farmers who are really struggling to recruit people at the moment because migrant workers from the EU are simply not coming because they don't feel welcome. So I think there was hyperbole, but I think there is a point.
Dawn Foster, David Scullion, thank you both for your time. The response from the Prime Minister's spokesman today: there will be no Armageddon.
MPs will only get one day to discuss and vote on all 15 Lords' amendments to the EU withdrawal bill after the government decided to cram the entire bill into a single session. Critics have accused the Prime Minister of trying to railroad her plans through Parliament. Our political editor Gary Gibbon joins us. What's the rush?
Well, that's what quite a few MPs are asking. They say you have us sitting around here weeks on end, Whip's too nervous to have any votes, not much business in the House of Commons, and suddenly this great pressure. The answer is, I think, our old friend, the need to manage the Tory party through the Brexit process. And what Theresa May is doing by having these votes next week is one for the Brexiteers, particularly the group of Brexiteers who organised backbenchers into the ERG, the European Research Group. They've been pushing for this vote. They want to stare down, to pressurise the pro-Remain MPs, to face them down, and they hope to secure this vital bill, the European Withdrawal Bill, which they see as the key to actually getting Brexit.
Well, will it work, or are we going to see the government defeated?
Well, they could be defeated for starters on the whole idea of the speed of the evening's business. There's a motion that has to come first, a programme motion. It's possible that MPs might defeat that. There are other obvious key flashpoints that you've got to look at, like the customs union, and I think one almost certainty, a pretty strong candidate for a government defeat, is the idea of strengthening the vote that comes at the whole end of the Brexit process and making that even more meaningful, as it were, than it was in the first place. But that vote on the customs union could be key, or MPs might decide to keep their powder dry for another occasion. There are other episodes still to come in this saga, but there's no question the build-up to Tuesday of next week will be very fiery, and the day itself quite significant.
Thanks, Gary.
Well, what after seems like a period of reasonable quiet behind-the-scenes activity on Brexit, things will burst back into life a week tomorrow. The government says its Brexit legislation will return for votes in the Commons, a marathon session in which MPs are expected to vote into the early hours on the 15 amendments to the Brexit bill made by the Lords. Well, our political editor, Robert Peston, is here. What hope of the PM emerging unscathed from this? I mean, this is that people are angry that everything's being truncated into this short voting spell, aren't they, already?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. I mean, You know, we've been waiting what feels like forever for a decisive moment in this progress towards Brexit. And my goodness, there is going to be a big moment now on Tuesday. 15 votes. The Prime Minister wants to win all of them. And there are 2 or 3 in particular that really matter. Now, the one that stands out for me is the vote that would keep the UK or put the UK into a so-called customs union. Now, the Prime Minister has said it's a red line for her that we can't be part of a customs union. The Tory rebels who want us in a customs union have been meeting tonight and they think they have the numbers. So I would say there is a very good chance she will lose on that, and she may also lose on the issues of how much power MPs would have when it comes to a final vote on the Brexit deal. So a very worrying moment for her.
And how dangerous potentially do you think, Robert?
Well, I mean, the extraordinary thing is some MPs have said to me they think that she's sort of resigned to losing on customs. And in a way, that would be rational. You've seen how much trouble she is having coming up with an alternative customs plan. We still haven't got one. Also tonight, she was in a meeting with business leaders. They said they wanted her in a customs union. But her authority would be massively undermined if she lost this vote. She'd be the pawn of MPs. She would be, to use that well-worn phrase, in office but not in charge. And I'm not sure she could survive that.
Gosh, that's quite a thing. OK, Robert, thank you. We've got a few days to wait yet, but it'll be a big night. That's for sure. Thank you for that.